I'm back again to do another currently reading video. I did one of these in February as well and you guys seem to really enjoy it. Essentially all this video is a little bit of a chatty video where I talk about the books I am currently reading. So you get to hear my thoughts maybe halfway through, near the end, near the beginning, wherever I am in those books, as opposed to just my overall final reaction, which I think is quite interesting actually. You end up seeing how my thoughts develop. But on that note, let's get down to the books, shall we? So the first book I have to hand is Hag-Seed by Margaret Atwood. I've had this book on my shelf for a couple of months, but I was finally pushed to, grab it off the shelf when it was longlisted for the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction. And I thought, right, I need to get to that. So I am about 115 pages in and it's about 280 something, so just under halfway through, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm really intrigued to see where it goes. What I am noticing the most though is how I'm comparing it to other works by Margaret Atwood. So I have read 5 of Margaret Atwood's novels. This will be my 6th, and I realised that this is the first book I've read by her that is entirely narrated by a man. The only other book I've read by her that had a male character in any way narrating the novel was The Heart Goes Last, which is in part narrated by a man, in part narrated by a woman. But that book was very un-Atwood for me. It did not read like a Margaret Atwood book based on the 4 books I'd read previously, whereas this one has a little bit more Atwood to it, if that makes sense. Although it is still quite different, and in part because of the narration, I feel, and it's really interesting to read a book by her that's entirely narrated by a man. If you're not familiar, this is part of the Hogarth Shakespeare series, and it is based on, inspired by a retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest. Now I have actually read The Tempest, which was good. I thought, good, I can go straight into this with having read The Tempest, although I will say, reading it, you don't need to have read The Tempest to read this book. It is about our protagonist who's an actor and a playwright, and before the book starts he loses his wife during childbirth and then their daughter dies aged 3, so he's gone through quite a lot of loss, and as a sort of act of catharsis he is adapting The Tempest for the stage, and whilst he's in the process of adapting The Tempest he gets sacked from his job at the theatre company. And he ends up moving to a really rural house somewhere out in America and gets a job at a men's correctional facility, a prison, as an English and drama teacher. And things go on from there, but at the point I'm at, it's quite a pivotal moment in that he's had an opportunity to essentially get his revenge on the people that sacked him from his job, as well as an opportunity to finally put on his Tempest that he was working on when he was fired. So I'm at the point which I feel is the instigator for what are going to be lots of events in the rest of the novel. And I'm really intrigued to see how it all unfolds, and it's making me want to go back and reread The Tempest because I read it when I was in secondary school many years ago, so I could probably do with a refresh, and I might reread it after I've finished this book. But yeah, I am enjoying it so far and interested to see where it goes. I'm then about halfway through this book, which is The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander. This is the first book in the Chronicles of Prydain, and this is a children's fantasy series inspired by Welsh folklore. You might have seen it in my spring TBR. This has been lent to me by my friend Elle because I love The Black Cauldron, which is a Disney film that was inspired by the first 3 books in this series. So I'm finally getting to read the original stories that inspired that film, and obviously there's a lot more going on in the book, especially since the film is based on 3 books, and I mean that's always the case with books and films, there's usually more in the book. So there's more characters that I'm getting introduced to, but there's also these little moments with the main characters and the main events that I think, oh yeah, I remember that in the film, and it's just, do you know what it is? It just feels like such a traditional children's fantasy book. It makes me feel so nostalgic reading this book. It just has all the elements of a super traditional children's fantasy book. Follows our main protagonist, who is an assistant pig keeper of an oracular pig, a psychic pig, a pig that tells the future, and the horned king wants this pig because, I mean, who doesn't want to know the future, especially if you're trying to kind of rule the lands. So they're trying to save Henwen from, Henwen being the pig, from the horned king, and it just has all the markers of a great children's fantasy book if that's your kind of thing, and I'm really enjoying it, and it's a really fast read. I am then what must be literally about 10-20 minutes from the end of The Sign of Four by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle on Audible. So you might know this, but in February, I think it was February, Audible released the entire complete works of Sherlock Holmes stories, novels, short stories, all of it, all of Sherlock Holmes as sort of one audiobook narrated by Stephen Fry. And Stephen Fry is a superb audiobook reader. Many of you may be familiar with his audiobook readings from the Harry Potter series, which he did an excellent job of, and he is so good at Sherlock Holmes. In fact, I didn't know I needed this in my life until I had it, when I realised it had always been missing. I love Sherlock Holmes, you know this, I've done videos about Sherlock Holmes before, and I have read all the novels and short stories, but it's been a while since I've read most of them. I think I read The Valley of Fear last year in a reread, but other than that it's been a while, and I have never read them in complete order from beginning to end. I think I started with one of the collections of short stories, then I read all of the novels together, and then I read the rest of the short stories, whereas it goes like 2 novels and a collection of short stories, and it's more spread out like that. So I downloaded the audiobook, which is 70 hours long but only 1 credit. I'm so blown away by this, and have already listened to A Study in Scarlet, which is the first novel and where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson meet, and I'm now almost at the end of The Sign of Four, which is the second novel, and will presumably start the first collection of short stories afterwards, although I might take a little break and listen to a different audiobook for a while. But The Sign of Four has always been my favourite. As a mystery, I mean, none of the mysteries you can solve yourself, but I always just find it a very intriguing mystery, but it's also probably the one I've reread the most. So I actually think I enjoyed listening to Study in Scarlet slightly more because I've only read it maybe twice, whereas The Sign of Four I've read very many times. So it was nice listening to A Study in Scarlet for the first time, but I've still been enjoying The Sign of Four. Sherlock Holmes is like comfort reading for me. It makes me feel so at home, and I just adore it. And if you've never read them and have been looking to get into them, I would highly recommend Stephen Fry's narrations. The last book I have to mention was actually in my last currently reading video because I haven't finished it, and it's on my Kindle, and that is The Accusation by Bandy. This is a collection of short stories by a North Korean author who managed to get his fiction outside of the country to be published even though he's still in North Korea. These short stories are about ordinary North Koreans' life, but they all take place in a sort of critical moment in their lives where the North Korean sort of dictatorship regime has like caused some really negative extreme impact on their life, where their ordinary lives kind of fall apart, or they suddenly realise how much damage living in this system is causing them. I'm sorry, I'm being really inarticulate right now, but they're all at a climactic point in these people's lives as a citizen in this country. I've read 1 more short story since the last video. I think I've read 4 short stories now, and there's 7 in total. I do think they're really interesting when I'm reading them. I'm just not necessarily compelled to move on to the next short story once I'm done, and I think that's because at this point, after 4, although each plot line is slightly different and it's a different thing happening to them, they have a slight air of repetitiveness, and I get why. That's not a criticism. I think when it comes to short stories though, if they are all very similar in theme, it's nice to take little breaks between them, and that's just me as a reader. But they are really interesting. The one I just read was about a man who wants to visit his ailing mother but can't get permission to go to that section of the country, so has to sort of do it illegally. And I won't say any more, no spoilers. I think if you're looking for short stories with a little bit more plot though, with a beginning, middle, end, and kind of climax, then these might be short stories you want to check out, because they do feel like real stories in that way, if that makes sense. I don't know. And I've only read about the first 2 pages of this just to check, because I thought it might be the next book I'd want to read, and I think it is. So this is the book I'm going to read after I finish these, but I'm not actually reading it right now, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. But do let me know if you have any thoughts on the books I've mentioned in this video, the good, the bad and the ugly. And if you're reading anything particularly good at the moment, I'd love to hear about that as well. Until next time guys, happy reading. I'll see you all again soon. Bye!